Hello, welcome to the Bread of Life channel. I'm Rebecca and I'm here with Skylar. And Skylar has a YouTube channel where you can hear more about her and her journey of faith. So I recommend checking that out. The link is in the description. And what I love about your channel, Skylar, is that you are so open and honest and so authentic, so vulnerable on your channel, and you're a really deep thinker. So you really think about things of faith and you don't just, take and believe whatever you're told. You really have thought out some issues, and I look forward to hearing from you. So thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, it's a privilege to be on your channel. I also really admire your all the videos you've made. You've made so many. It's like hard to even like summarize well, but I really appreciate your perspective on particularly LGBT topics. And I find a lot of agreement in just my own personal journey and like you were saying, like really leaning into and assessing different just different things that can be discussed in Christian circles and maybe go unchallenged. Um, and yeah, and so there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, I'm happy to be on the stream with you today.
Cool. Well, we're ready to hear your journey, and I don't want to interrupt you too much. So I'm just going to be mostly listening, and I may have a question or two, but please just share with what you'd like to share.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess like a good place to start is really so I'll talk about like my life essentially from the viewpoint of my transition as well as like my family's dynamics and faith. Um so I come from a conservative, very conservative Christian family. I have three younger brothers and two wonderful parents. I'm really blessed to have such faithful parents, really. They're incredible people. But growing up was very much involved in the church. Like life really revolved around the church and around God and faith. And that extends even to my extended family. So really like all of my family is in this evangelical Christian space. Um, Growing up, my parents both worked initially, and my grandmother took care of me. She also was a very strong woman of faith. She unfortunately passed away when I was 4 years old, and my mom, I guess, wanted to spend more time with her kids. Also felt more called to that, and also with the social paradigm of the church and the roles of women, that was a very supportive thing. So that was something like expected and sort of encouraged. So she became a stay-at-home mom and took care of me and my brothers as we came into the picture. And so, yeah, so really, and my dad, who was working at the time, was um, in the social services, psychology sort of area. He worked for group homes for young boys, troubled young boys that were at risk and needed state intervention to really help take care of them and support them because their parents were either abusive or couldn't handle that. And so, that being said, though, when I was 6 years old, I think, or somewhere around there, he started his own company doing that and became very successful. And so that's sort of the backdrop of how I was raised and born in that space. But growing up, I had three younger brothers, and particularly the one closest in age to me, we were pretty close. Even though we're very different people, he has a very black and white sort of perspective, or I guess disposition naturally to him, very confident. Whereas I'm a lot more nuanced, I guess, when it comes to just speaking on things. It kind of translates to a hesitancy sometimes that I've seen in myself. And that's something where I'm trying to overcome that and really work through that to be more bold and online, more or less. But yeah, so growing up, really, I was a very conventional boy, honestly. I didn't have anything outwardly except for a couple of moments and a little bit of femininity with me that did kind of have a more, I guess, a more level amount of expression, meaning like I wasn't really aware of how I was aware of how boys should act, but I wasn't aware of the behaviors in myself that might be perceived femininely, because that's something you learn over time and you get that from feedback about when people I guess, respond to you. Um, and my parents, again, were very loving and didn't really, they didn't really chastise me for odd behaviors. But there was one thing in particular that I did that is not unlike, or that is more unlike most, I'd say, most kids. And that was that I would do this activity that my family would call my pretending. And I think this is actually a really interesting psychological insight into me. Um, and it has to do with that I was really good at entertaining myself for hours, honestly. It was really honestly, it's really shocking to look back on and be like, oh yeah, I could just do this ad nauseum every day for hours, where like kids nowadays just play video games usually, or do something like that. My version of that was just go outside and immerse myself in my own imaginary world. And when I do this, I wouldn't usually use props. I would just literally walk around, but I would take on personas and really just practice embodying different characters through my imagination. Um, and no one told me to do this. No one taught me to do this. This was just me doing my thing. Um, and I really would do this everywhere. I was kind of conscious that it was not necessarily a normal thing to do. So like there were times I remember after church where like I would hang out with friends for a little bit, and then I'd kind of get bored and I'd go off and do this and I just do my own thing, and I'd kind of go where no one would really see me, but also people would walk by me and see me. So it was kind of like I was conscious that it was weird, but like also just kind of like whatever. I wanted to do it, so I did it, kind of thing. Um, and I didn't want to go too far away or my parents would get upset. So this was just, something, a little window into, I guess, my psychology really before middle school, where it starts to taper down a little bit more and friends start to become a lot more relevant. Um, but sort of connected to this, again, my family was in the conservative evangelical space. So homeschooling was how I was raised up until fifth grade, where I really started to decline educationally, really, because I wasn't getting social stimulus. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily appreciate all the time in our culture, but like just learning from each other is just so powerful. Um, and it turns out that's what I was missing a lot in my life. And it just became really obvious by fifth grade. That I was sort of like, as I like to say, lonely, but I didn't really know it. So I couldn't describe that. And then I go to middle school, and that's Christian school, where I will continue until I graduate in 12th grade. It was a K through 12 private Christian school with an extremely small number of students. My graduating class was 17 people total, just to put that in perspective. I want to rewind a little bit back to when I was 8 years old. So growing up, again, like I was saying, I was sort of this child that would have been seen as relatively normal kid, but with a little bit of feminine gesture or a little bit of femininity too. And this comes into the picture when it comes to same-sex attraction, which is something that's been a part of my story. But also opposite sex attraction. So I've come to see myself as bisexual. And I'm very comfortable with that label now. But that growing up was very difficult to understand and figure out for myself. Um, and so I'd say my first signs that something was different about me. I think it really started before I was necessarily 8 years old, but I like to use the story of 8 years old because that is the most clear. Like I'm the most confident in speaking to that moment, because that was when I remember just having a much larger awareness that, hey, there's something going on with me, but I really couldn't understand it at all. And that was I had dreams again up until around age 8. I don't know exactly when they started. Maybe 6 years old, maybe even younger. But I would be a girl in my dreams. And now you might wonder, like, what does that actually mean, right? Like, what does it mean to be a girl in your dreams? And it really just means that the associated elements of women were what I was presenting as in my dream. So I had long hair, I would wear a dress. And that was really my extent of knowledge as to what was represented by females. And I loved these dreams. That was the interesting piece, is that I was a little bit like, why? Like, I was confused, but I was also like, I really like those dreams. I like having those dreams. I don't want to wake up from those dreams. I do, but you don't want to necessarily. Um, and then also kind of tying back to the imaginative embodiment, I would embody all sorts of characters. I would do guys, I would do girls. I'd want to play every aspect. Um, Really, it's just all sorts of characters. A lot of times from watching TV or reading a book, or pulling from some kind of like resource, or entertainment that I've just been recently exposed to. Um, so when I was 8 years old, I remember we were moving. My parents were building a house, and we were staying with my grandparents. But in their bathroom, in one of my grandparents' bathrooms, I was taking a bath, and I just remember praying to God to turn me into a girl. Um, I knew that this was, again, different and unusual, but I didn't necessarily feel like shameful about it, because it just wasn't something that ever came up around my family. Trans people were not visible like they are today. It wasn't a topic really, so it was just kind of a private, very private, personal experience that I knew would not be received well by them, but I also didn't necessarily think was wrong or shameful in that moment of that experience. Um, but I do remember praying to God repeatedly, sort of under my breath, in this bathroom, to turn me into a girl. And I remember my dad coming in to check on me, because I'm only 8 years old, so I'm just taking a bath, and I think my siblings were rotating in and out. It's just kind of a cute family moment. My parents are loving it. In fact, they're even videotaping it because it's just so fun. But I'm meanwhile going in this like psychological experience that I can't even understand, and much less feel comfortable talking about. But I just remember desperately longing to be female, in whatever that meant. Um, and that was when I was 8 years old. And so that experience sort of continued, where I would pray off and on, typically at night. For whatever reason, it would normally be at night, I guess, when I'm trying to fall asleep. Sometimes you have a little bit of insomnia before you can actually get tired, or your brain's just running with things. And in those moments, I do remember being like, oh, I wish God would just turn me into a girl overnight, and I'd wake up a female. Like, that would just be incredible. I don't know what that would mean. All the hypotheticals, like, would my family know I was a boy before, etc. Like, all those things kind of run through your head. But it just was something endogenous to me that wasn't through any exposure. This is just something that I I experienced at this young age. And so continuing forward, my family, the house gets finished, we move in, and I think I'm like 9 or 10, and we're living there, and finally go a little bit further to 11 and 12, and I start to go through puberty. And this is when it starts to get even more intertwined into my psyche, in a sense that I'm a boy, and so I'm going through testosterone insurgence. So I'm having a lot of like sexual awakening, discovery, and my dreams likewise morph into that space as well. Where now it's not just me being a girl, it's me seeing myself that way, having relations with whoever it is in my dream. And this is like really kind of freaking me out. But again, it's something I like. It's like, it feels right to me. And I can't explain it. That was really the theme of my story, is that it's so hard to explain these complex feelings. But as I got a little bit older, into 13, 14, this experience was so predominant and reoccurring that I was sort of drawn to investigate. I was like, I need to get some answers as to what's going on with this. And so I went online, and this is, again, a while ago. Like, this is 2000, mid 2000s. The internet is on the scene, but people are just kind of getting broadband or like better connections. So it's like, AOL is still a standard here. Like, this is really back a while. And I came across a lot of different websites and resources by just Googling, hey, I want to be a girl. What does this mean? And I came across this one particular section of literature that is what I would call the sexology literature. And it posits this theory that there's two types of trans people. And in reading that, I was very disheartened by sort of what I read about the kind that corresponded to me when it was, sort of there's a sexual energy to it. There's a deeper psychology here with this too. And there's a lot of emotionality, but there's a predominant unifying element is this sexuality. And it has to do with autosexuality. And I was just really uncomfortable with what I was reading and like, oh, this isn't me. Like, I can't be this. And just really rejecting that. But also recognizing like there's patterns and elements here. And so really though, the thing about it is you don't choose your sexuality that chooses you. And for whatever, reason, right now I'm still of the opinion it's in utero process where in some reason the hormonal wash during in utero causes mismappings of sorts and different ways of experiencing sexual attraction. But for sure, that is sort of what I would come later to realize. But at this point, I just resolved, okay, I know about this information about autosexuality and potentially being attracted to yourself as female or needing to see yourself that way in your mind in order to engage sexually with people and realizing this. And so I just bottled it away. I didn't want to address it at this point in my life. Dysphoria wasn't as huge as disruptive in my life. That's sort of the way I would best describe it. But looking back, as I go into my teenage years, this starts to become more of a thing. So I do want to kind of backtrack and say this is also mixed in with complications of liking guys and girls all throughout this process. Seeing, I think going into middle school. So now I want to go back to the whole situation of my environment. Going into middle school, like I was saying, I was homeschooled before that. So I didn't really have a lot of male socialization. And actually one of my best friends that I ended up making during school at this private school later confessed to me when I was like in high school that he actually thought I was gay coming into school. And that kind of terrified me a little bit. And then he was like, but then, you kind of like saw what the boys were like and you adapted to it. And that is a part of my story. I was really successful at blending in and subduing any sort of the markers of what someone might see as like gender nonconforming behavior or mannerisms going into school. And it wasn't that hard for me to do that. I could just kind of lean into that aspect of myself. But what I didn't realize is that I am a person of this much broader range of expression where I like to express all of that, including femininity. It's healthier in a way for me to do that. And I, of course, did not know this at the time. But that was a big part of my experience. So that was why, because I was so successful at being male, I really resolved that I'm not trans. I'm not going to go down this road. I don't want to do those things. I'm just going to live my life as normal as possible because that's sort of like the goal of what is conducive for my environment, my family, and all the people around me. I didn't know a single trans person. I didn't even know a gay person. That would all happen in college. So I get older and going into high school and I'm having crushes on girls. I'm also having crushes on guys. But again, I'm not acting at all. And I'm really pushing those thoughts as soon as they come in my head. I'm like, I don't want to even think about guys. Girls or being a girl is okay. That's sort of how I felt about it. And now looking back, I spent a lot of mental energy on ruminating of what life would be like as a woman, especially in school. I remember like sitting, I don't want to say this sound like a bad student, but like there are times where you're a little bored in class and you're listening to that lecture and you're thinking about something totally different. And looking back, I'm realizing how much of my mental energy in those time frames was just me running through hypothetical scenarios of what would life be like if I was a girl at my school? Would I be like would I have friends that are, would I have more friends that are girls? Would I get to dress like the girls? Would I get like, it was just all these hypotheticals about what is it like being a girl in my school versus my own experience. And I think part of that was exacerbated by the traditional gender I don't want to say stereotypes, but it's a private Christian school. It's very um there's very rigid boundaries in how guys are allowed to present and girls. Like there's dress codes for each. There's expectations with each. And so that really, I think that elevates the, I don't want to say dysphoria, but it causes there to be a sharper ability to distinguish what you associate with like female or femininity versus what you associate with masculinity. Um, so continuing from there, I do reflect on when I was in my teenage years. I had these, what I almost call like odd rituals of coping with what I think were sort of the beginning signs of gender dysphoria really starting to become an experience for me. And that had to do with there were three things that come to my mind immediately. And the first one is that I would tuck my genitals a lot because I didn't want to see that part of myself. The second one is that I would pull the fat forward of my chest to like simulate what I would look like with breasts and just kind of just to picture what that would look like. And then the third one is shaving. I would commonly try to shave, but also couldn't really do it in a way that was comfortable for me without risk of somebody potentially seeing it and then asking me questions, which I was so wildly uncomfortable with this part of myself in this time that I didn't want to even risk that. So I was just really private experience here, going through these different things. But I remember doing these things, and now looking back, it stands out more. But in the moment, it was just me coping with, I think, where I was at the time, again, having very little resources to understand this experience for myself, or examples to see, like online, let's say, because there weren't that many trans people online at this time. But that comes later. So all through growing up, I am very much immersed in my family's faith. And I'm really trying to bring it on to myself. When I was 8 years old, the same time I was having those, I was praying to God to turn me into a girl, I actually accepted Jesus into my heart as my Lord and Savior. And looking back, I think I was sincerely wanting to do that, or like wanted to with the limited understanding I had. But a big part of it too was that I wanted to please my parents. That is very much a theme in my history of wanting to make my parents happy, wanting to please those around me. I'm naturally a people pleaser. It's just how I think. Some people are a lot more like unabashed or brazen, or don't care as much, or don't let it influence what they say or how they act. But it for me was absolutely an overarching piece of shaping my behavior, and really just, I think, reflecting a sensitivity that I had to how people were around me. And so, going from there, I didn't really, I don't think my faith was really made a real thing until I started to go to school. Because up until that point, my environment was so predominantly Christian that there really wasn't any opportunities to be challenged or make a substantial action of your faith. And so I was, even though I was going with this under this identity as Christian, it really starts to mean more to me when I start to go to school, and I start having more moments where I have to make decisions about, am I going to lie? Am I going to cheat on this test? There's different opportunities to make decisions and bring God into the what you're doing and what you're going through. But that being said, I was reading my Bible and I was having quiet times with God and enjoying that spirituality and that connection that I think is critical, really, to the Christian experience, which again is all founded really on that relationship with Jesus and understanding what he's done for us as imperfect people that really need a savior and need redemption from ourselves, or else we're just, we're sort of have self-destructive tendencies, and we need to have something to buffer that. And even more than that, have enjoy the life that God brings, because there is sort of a synonymousness with that. I've come to see that. But as so going forward, when I was 14, sort of in the moments of when I'm going through this, my sexuality privately, and starting to cope with dysphoria a little bit more, I remember making the decision to get baptized. Actually, I'm sorry, I was 15 when I made this decision, but I made a decision to get baptized, and that really made my faith real to me. I also led Bible studies for both genders. It was just a middle school Bible study when I was in 8th grade. And I was really, really, really in it for Jesus, and at this period of my life. I remember I was so absorbed in this that even small incidents of like where my friends wouldn't do something I thought was Christian enough or something, I would like worry psychologically about it. Like I would cry and break down and be like, they don't know what they're doing. And I was just, it was motivated out of a good place, but it was on an unhealthy um, mental space to be in when you care so much about other people's um, behavior. And kind of, looking back again, I'm realizing this now, but back then it was just, I'm just going through it in real time and just kind of growing through my experiences. Um, and so, continuing on that path, though, in high school, I am also still very much engaged in leading Bible groups, study groups, being a leader in my church, at least in the youth sense. I performed on the worship team. I was a drummer, actually. I love rhythm, but I was raised with piano lessons all the way up until I was in 8th grade. And then that was discontinued because I was more interested in percussion and drums. I also did a little bit with guitar. I thought that was fun. But I really liked rhythm. I still really like it. And so, yeah, going from there though, something that I do think is interesting is that um, the issue of gender dysphoria for me was beginning to affect me. And I say this in the sense that it was shaping my desire for where I would go to college. Um, a lot of my school sort of had this like pipeline to Liberty University in Virginia. It's not far away from where I went to school, and we actually went there for a number of Christian conferences growing up. And they were wonderful experiences, always left supercharged in my faith. Um, but that being said, I felt like I knew so much about Christian culture, and I wanted to know more about what else is out there, because I didn't feel like it was going to serve me to only have this one framework to look at my identity with, and my issues that were sort of very much private, but I was also aware of surprisingly a good amount by this point, because this is now 17, 18. So this has been going on for a little while, and I'm realizing there's something different about me compared to the people around me, at least in the ways that we're talking and relating with people. And so, but at this point, I had only dated. So I do want to kind of step back to before I go to college. 16, 17, I had my first girlfriend. No boys, again, no boy experiences up until this point. That happens in college, but girlfriend happens. And we are very good about having boundaries in our relationship. That was extremely important to our families, of course, and also to us. But as many young people do, things got a little bit carried away at a couple moments. Not definitely not a hallmark of the relationship, but definitely something that did happen in it, and especially towards the end of it. And I just remember there being a huge amount of cognitive dissonance when we did escalate things to a more sensual level. And I had to almost like disassociate from what was going on and imagine myself as female in my mind, just so I could like participate in what was going on. It was extremely it's still hard to describe exactly what that means. Um, but it's something in my psychology that I think I had to disassociate, and sort of the way to do that is just close your eyes and kind of block out, but also don't do that too obviously, or she'll think you're not, like, something's wrong, and so you don't want to like signal that either. um and so anyways, it's this whole like balancing act. So
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to jump in and say thank you for sharing all this, because I am sure that there are other people who are going through this experience, and it's probably really, really helpful to have like this level of detail shared about your experience, because you know like you said, at that time there weren't there you didn't have a lot of resources and people to share their experience, and that's more available now. But thank you for like going into this level of depth and kind of sharing what you went through. So yeah, appreciate it.
yeah.
Okay, so back to the story.
Yeah, okay. No, thanks for interjecting. I felt like I had been like just going on, and I want to make sure I'm like staying cohesive enough for the story. But also being truthful about all the depth of it, because it really does go deep. And I want to stress that. I also really am a believer that it's an endogenous problem that interacts with your social circumstances, your environment, but is something that you can't wish it away, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And it has to be dealt with and understood. Um, and so anyways, coming back to her, so that was a very eye-opening experience for me. And I realized, like, I need to understand this more, and in particular I want to know what it's like to be with guys. That's another piece of this. And I also knew about my Christian background. I knew how people felt about gay people and trans people in my space. Absolutely. The trans people, again, were not really ever something brought up or discussed. This is before Caitlyn Jenner's out. This is before all sorts of like milestones culturally take place, which is all when I'm in college. But gay people were discussed, and not in a good light at all. In fact, I even at this time in my life, I thought that being gay was a choice, and is a lifestyle, all of those things that come with like the Christian ideology in a conservative paradigm. And I was actually all for that. My school had a Wednesday, on every Wednesday we had this thing. I can't remember the name of it anymore, but it was essentially where we'd bring in Christian speakers, and the entire goal was to basically argue against secularism, argue against worldliness of all sorts, and become like Christian warriors out into the world. Um, Ironically, they never really brought in any like atheists or agnostics, any real like threats, I would say, to their ideology. And they never brought in anyone that was gay or bisexual or trans, even, for sure, no one. But it was definitely talked about negatively. I even remember going to a youth group where there was a story shared about a girl who had premarital sex, and the guy was so awful that, for whatever, I have no idea why, but I know what they were trying to do is trying to scare us out of this. But the story goes where she hooks up with him after getting led on, and then see, like, somehow there's like a teddy bear by her bed or something, and it has a noose on it, a rope around it, and it's like, congratulations, you have AIDS, or something like that, or HIV or something, which is like so ridiculous, but also like, oh my gosh, like, I remember being in middle school, that terrified me. And so that was kind of this culture I grew up in. We also had to sign contracts saying we wouldn't like have premarital sex and all sorts of stuff like this. So very, very conservative Christian in those ways. Um, I don't believe in those things anymore. I see them as good intent, but bad results. I don't think it's the right way to go about it. I think relationship and discussion and really being connected to your children is the better route to go. Now in hindsight now. Okay, let's get back to the story. So yeah, so again, the pipeline was to Liberty. And so all of my, like, a lot of my friends are going there. A lot of people from my class, but I wanted to know a little bit more. I had this like driving force of a thirst to understand all perspectives and viewpoints to help me in my decision making and figure out where I fit in life and what I want out of life. And so I chose a secular school that was just a couple hours north of Liberty. It was James Madison University. And I really loved the school. I loved the people. I felt like I belonged there. And so I went there. And of course, my parents are like, yeah, you can go there. We're just going to make sure you get connected to the Christian organizations right away and kind of funnel you into that like part of the school's pipeline. Because thankfully they weren't closed off. They weren't closed minded. They just were really, really bought in on the, the environment that they had sort of created around being Christian. And I sincerely went there earnestly thinking I would seek out those Christian groups and make friends there, because that's really how it would stick, is through friendships. And I did seek out the Christian groups, but I also did have an open mind to partying. I wanted to see what that was like. But at a very much a distance. I didn't want to like drink and get drunk. I didn't want to make risky decisions. I just wanted to see what it was like. What was the atmosphere like? Because it was so new and it was so different to me. And so going into school there, I made friends mostly with my quad mates. I was in a special room that had 3 other guys in it. So we had a lot of great like camaraderie and stories, and it was really a special time. But I remember going in there, and even though I went and checked out these parties and at a distance and just kind of tried to also get connected to the Christian group, I went to the Friday night worship sessions that they would have, and definitely dabbled in different groups. I never formed intensely good friendships in the guys group that I had gotten kind of funneled into, that small group. And I don't know why exactly that was, except for that it was just a little bit cliquey, as so often can happen, especially in a new group of young college guys. And so that sort of happened and whatever. But I remember with my quad mates, I really rubbed them the wrong way on accident. But it was because of the product of my background environment. I would say things and do things that I wasn't aware of that really, for lack of a better word, it sometimes pissed them off. I mean, just because I was an unaware person. And I didn't realize how I was coming across. And so sometimes when I would say things like, oh yeah, I think being gay is a choice, or I would describe them, which I don't think you should ever do with people generally good to avoid describing other people, unless they're really outspoken about it. But I would do that too. And they actually like sat me down one time and were like, Skylar, you have done these things or like said these things and they're hurtful, etc. And over the course of that first semester, this is all freshman year, I realized like I need to learn more about the world and figure things out. I don't know if the Bible alone is going to teach you how to live it out. And that's sort of the theme out of that. I'm like, I need real world experiences around people that don't think just like me. And that sort of became, at the end of that semester, I had a friend that had gone to school with me, but he had left and gone to a public high school. He held a party and I decided I was going to get drunk and see what happened. And I did. And I woke up the next day at like 5 a.m. and did all my homework and was like, oh my gosh, I thought I would be going to hell. I thought this was horrible. And I completely don't feel like that. Like in my emotions, I just didn't feel that as being a reality. And it threw me and I started to question everything. And I started to really lean away from the background that I had been raised in. And all during this, my faith is there, but it's very much on the back burner. I can't bring it into my existence so much because it complicates it so much. Because what I think of faith is so shaped by what I had kind of been raised in, that it acted more as like noise for me in trying to understand where I fit and how things work. And so, and then that would sort of be a theme that would continue for a while until recently. And I would come back to Jesus and God and seeing spirituality as being really so important in our lives, and that God is real and he's there for us. But I couldn't process all that there then, and it wouldn't be that way for a while. Even though I would make efforts right before transitioning, going back to church, doing Bible studies, and immersing myself in communities again, really just as part of my decision to transition and challenging myself as much as possible going into this. But that comes a little bit later. So in college, um, so that happens at the end of, towards the end of freshman year, and oh, I have this like wispy right here. It's bothering me, but um, yeah. So basically, I I'm not happy with everything I understand. I don't think I know everything. And so I'm out there kind of getting new experiences. And in this process, um, I I resolved that I'm going to go out dressed as a woman and go to bars to understand like what that's like socially. And I did this. I like summer of either freshman year or sophomore year. I'm not quite sure which, but I do. I dress up in a dress. I do makeup and everything. And I just remember driving downtown. This was over the summer. My family was out of town, and I just had the house to myself. And I just remember the private anguish of, I love this so much. I'm so happy, and this is incredible. Like, I'm just so, I felt like it was like fulfilling me in some weird way. And I couldn't really explain it, but it represented this like apex of conflict in a way, because it was like teaching me that there's this huge other part of myself that I've bottled up, I've repressed, and um is it needs an outlet for expression at the least. And I'm realizing this. And so I go out, I have a great time downtown. I'm scared as all to go outside and go to the bar, but I do it because I need to. And I believe in testing myself and pushing the boundaries to understand more. And I just remember leaving all of it, as even though I was so happy in the moment, I was so privately tormented by the conflict of my identity. Um, having sort of leaned in to the gender dysphoria and being like, I'm going to see what life is like if I accept what this is telling me about myself, versus how much of my life was spent repressing that aspect of myself. Um, and just realizing that, yes, there is something here. And so that's what happens. I go out and I have a great experience, and I do that again and again. And also, I resolve that I'm going to hook up with boys and see what that's like. And so I remember at the time there were a couple of different apps. Grinder is always a main one for a lot of gay guys. And so I would go on there, and I met up with a couple, and we did stuff. And I was so repressed that I just made sure that no one in my circle, in my dorm, or anyone in my later on in my house would know. And I was successful at this. I was very good at being secretive when it came to all this stuff. I wanted to preserve this easy life of being this normal heterosexual boy that I had crafted for years and had really maintained. I didn't want anyone to know that I enjoyed or had experiences with men. I was terrified of how that would complicate and take away from the ease in my life. And so I kept it very separate. So I really lived like a dual life during college, especially towards the end of college, like this. Um, and so I remember I didn't always enjoy the experiences with boys, but some of them I did really enjoy. And I I remember that confusing me a lot about like, what do I want to do for my life? Like, who should I partner with? And I eventually resolved that there is no such thing as like a perfect choice. I think anyone with their sexuality makes compromises to some extent. And that's part of life, is like, you shouldn't look to be fully satisfied sexually in any direction you go. You have to make choices, and it's more important that you stick with the person you pick and you choose in that commitment, because that's just what's going to at the end of the day, that's what really matters, is the commitment and the relationship with that person. And I was really grateful to have seen that in my parents' life. Just them staying married and together, and resembling what that meant for me. I think that has had a tremendous impact. Um, but I'm going through these different experiences, and then eventually I resolved, like, I'm going to dress up as a girl and hook up with boys, and that like supercharged everything. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is really intense, but I wasn't ready to go down that road. I was like, I need to fight this as much as I can, and not go into this. And I remember really amplifying my faith during this time of like, I need to supercharge the spiritual energy and substitute it with what I'm trying to meet in other ways. And that was really another apex of conflict in my life, where I was like, I need to give all out energy to the Christian, to what like the Christian community would say I'm supposed to do. And so I did that. Um, and it sort of worked a little bit, but like anything, when it's so integral to who you are and it's a part of you, it doesn't actually end up working. You're just working through the time to understand that. And that's exactly what happened to me. It was like, I remember just struggling, like, oh, I don't want to go. I don't want to hook up with guys. I don't want to hook up with girls. But I inevitably would go to parties, and I would end up hooking up with girls because it was something I could get away with and make it look like that's me. That's who I am, and almost convince myself too that that's who I am. And just really being selective and choosing of what people see, and controlling that image, because people really care about their reputation. It's like, in well, you can go on and on about that. But that was a big theme. And then finally graduation happens, and I start to go out on the real world on my own. And this is where I resolve again that I kind of lost a little bit more of that Christian influence around me that I had kind of collected in college. And when I moved to Washington, D.C. for my first job, I took that as sort of a reprieve and began exploration again a little bit. And this time it was the dysphoria was really beginning to disrupt my life. I had done a great job compartmentalizing it up until I'm like 23, 24 now. And it's so disruptive. I can't appreciate anything. I see women enjoying life, and I just can't help but think, oh, I really wish I was like them. I really wish I was living that in that way and seeing that way, and embodying all of the social expectations of what it means to be a woman in society, including the physicality. I want to look like that, like at a very tangible level. And I just remember, like, it was really just a disruption of thoughts that would be consistent. And it's like, I am a believer that you can control your thoughts, and you should try to. But I'm also a believer that sometimes there's a pattern that's underneath there, and that you got to recognize that pattern, and you got to kind of work with it too. You can't just spend your whole life fighting and resisting who you are. Some people think you should, but I am not one of those people. I think you need to use the energy in that pattern for the betterment, for good, as much as you can. But I wasn't there at that time. And so I I just remember grappling with this, and then and so things really start to change when I meet my future partner, who is now my wife. And I remember meeting her, and it was right after a very traumatic experience at my job, where my manager, who I was close with, he was 28. He was like a role model to me. He was like the closest thing to a big brother I had ever had. And I had only worked with him for 6 months, but we had talked a lot about video games that we both liked. And he was a great person. He ran a 4K. He held a 5K, or yeah, 5K is actually what it is. Marathon that was called a zombie run out at this rural area, but to raise money for underprivileged kids that couldn't go to community college, to help them get a head start in life. He was just such a role model to me in so many ways like this. And one morning he didn't show up for work. And it's just three of us in this little office, me and another coworker and him. And come to find out, he had gotten in a fatal car accident that morning. And that was why he hadn't shown up. And so that really hit me with this realization that I need to really make some critical decisions about who I am and where I'm going in my life. Besides the fact that as my dysphoria is getting worse and worse, and at this point I'm like shaving all my body hair. I am cross-dressing a lot just to cope with who I am. I'm just trying to make sense of it. But again, I'm trying as best I can to kind of conceal it from the real world that I'm in every day at my job and such. But something that I think doesn't get talked about in the progression of gender dysphoria is how as you get older, you move more into the gendered appearance of whatever your biological sex is. So for me, that's developing facial hair, thinning head hair, all the things that guys go through. And that exacerbates dysphoria like crazy because the distance grows between who you see yourself in your head and your mind and what you desire to connect emotionally to how you actually physically look. And it's tormentful. And that's what was happening to me. And so it all kind of comes to a head when I meet my future partner. So kind of pivoting again from the emotional trauma of my supervisor passing away, I meet my partner, future partner, but we hit it off right off the bat. I have a date with her at Chick-fil-A. I'm a huge fan of Chick-fil-A. Something you're not really supposed to say in the LGBT world necessarily. I learned that later on, but I like the food and she did too. And so we had our first date there. We have a funny story with that, but I'm not going to go into it now. But the point is that I went and gave a eulogy for my manager, Michael was his name. And I slid her the piece of paper and I said, can you keep this? I just want you to have this because I just shared this and I was very much emotionally erratic at this time. Like I'm just kind of going all over the place on this date. But leaving it, I called my mom, and I never would do this because if I call my mom, it's real and she's going to be following up and telling people. But I had to tell her, and I was like, Mom, I think I met the girl for me. Like she listened and we just had an amazing time. She made me laugh over and over. I made her laugh. That's always a big sign to me that like, this is probably a really good connection. And so, like after that, and so fast forward, I knew I needed to tell her though, because I knew this huge amount of emotional burden about me struggling with my identity. It had to come forward if I was going to seriously commit to her. And that's what happened. I did it in little doses. I first told her about 2 months in that I like to cross dress and that I have makeup and clothes, and that maybe we should go out sometime like that and see how it goes. And she reacted so nonchalant to it. I couldn't believe it. And I just remember like actually praying. I started to pray again. And I'm like, God, I think you're like blessing me in this and I don't even realize it. And I need to not only just express gratitude, but just pray that I navigate this correctly. Meanwhile, all during this time, ever since graduating college, I have been immersing myself in reading books about gender dysphoria, about trans identities, particularly at the intersection of Christianity, because that was sort of what was familiar to me and what I knew I would need to explain to the people around me. I needed frameworks, I needed words, I needed ways to understand myself, and I needed ways to communicate that to my loved ones because I knew that when I tell my parents this, it's going to destroy their world, even though it has nothing to do with how they raised me or anything like that. It's completely an endogenous experience. For me, very much so, because again, I have very little exposure to gay or trans people. I never met a trans person in college, but I did meet gay people and I loved hanging out with them. And that was another sign. So, but anyways, yeah. So at this point, I resolved to tell her, and I do. I tell her about my cross-dressing, and then finally we move forward a little bit, and I'm telling my parents, I think I want to marry this girl, and it hasn't even been a year. It's been about 10 months, but I've had enough short-term relationships with people, and as well as some long-term experiences that I had a really good sense of confidence in who I would want to partner with, based on just, again, those dynamics of relationship and our mutuality, our goals, a lot of those big picture things, as well as just the day to day. And we were inseparable too. That's the other piece of this. We were spending, not during the week because we each had to work and kind of live in our spots around DC, but on the weekends we were always together doing all sorts of things, volunteering at places, going out to dinner a lot. That was something we loved to do. And then just, doing a whole lot of different activities, hiking too. We love to hike. And so about 10 months in, I resolved that I'm going to propose to her. But before I propose to her, I'm going to tell her that I think I might be trans, or at the least, I'm gender fluid. I'm still trying to make sense of myself. And I'm very careful to not go too far in a prescriptive label or identity, because I don't want to box myself in my decision making. I want to just express that there's very large parts of myself that are gender incongruent or non-conforming, or however you want to fit the piece in. And so I think that's what I say. I think I'm gender fluid and possibly trans, but I tell her this on the way back from a Bible study at McLean Bible Church. That was where we were going, with some friends. And so, yeah, I don't know if you know.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with McLean Bible Church. Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah. So, so I tell her on the ride home, and it was like the hardest thing, one of the hardest things I had ever done, next to telling my parents. That was probably the hardest one. But this was second hardest because I really didn't want her to freak out or assume things or run away. And again, she amazed me at how she responded to me. I had built it up so much before telling her that after I told her, she sighed relief and was like, "Oh, I thought you were going to say you were dying of cancer or something like that. That's actually really bad." And again, I was sort of just washed over. And I feel like it was God's grace involved in this, very much so, in just putting her in my life for me. And just creating this very strong, inseparable bond in us that I just cannot take for granted. And I don't think it's me. I think there's something more that is the glue in why we're so connected and so unified through this. But she does have questions, naturally, and there is uncertainty. And this starts to kind of come in. And I say, well, we need to take a very rational approach to how to make these decisions. I view it as a medical issue because that's exactly how it's manifesting in my life. It's pulling away from my life, and it's disrupting me, and I need to figure out how to handle that and manage that. So I think a therapist is probably a good next step. Up until this point, I had not gone to a therapist. I had sort of tried my best to self-administer therapy by getting out in nature, doing different things, trying to keep my mind off of my gender problems. But inevitably, it was not going to work ultimately because they keep coming back. And so any moment I'm by myself and it's quiet, it's the flood and it's the central problem for me. And so that's where things kind of go next. And so I say, I might need to begin transition. I might need to consider hormones, but I want to be sure that that's what's right for me. And that is where we go. We go to a therapist. And again, I'm reading a lot of things. I'm not trusting that therapy is going to be exhaustive. I know enough about therapy in the modern climate that there's an affirmation culture that honestly, I don't know if that would serve me very well. I wanted to challenge it as much as I could, because I think that I still sort of harbor this belief that it's best if you can make peace with your body holistically and not need to do any medical intervention. But if you do, it's there for a reason. The technology is there, and it's a solution. It needs to not be seen as something that you're, I don't want to say like pursuing, but making an idol of transformation and how all of that is so life-giving. It's best seen as a means of coping with distress. That was very much how I felt about it. Due mainly to the invasive nature and the irreversibility of some of these procedures. It just needs to be treated sensitively and carefully. And I wanted that. But I didn't trust that necessarily that would happen in therapy, nor was I really comfortable with that either. I just felt like I needed to do that myself. And I needed to immerse myself in any critical content when it came to transition. And this really took two forms: stories by detransitioners, which were thankfully coming on the scene around this time. 2018 was the year that I was really going through a lot of this. And then and into 2019 and so on. But also on trans widows stories, which are stories of wives who are really ex-wives of partners who transitioned and typically become divorced. And they have very, very harsh things sometimes to say about it. But all of it is very valuable because it's seeing transition from a negative perspective, that I can sort of see what are the themes here? What are they saying is so negative? And a lot of it has to do with their own partner's relationship to the transition itself, and how they're putting it on a pedestal and not being able to listen and be sensitive to those around them. So I really wanted to make sure I maintained an awareness and a consciousness. And this was part of why I told my partner all this. At the same time, I also proposed to her in the next following month. So after I told her that I might be trans or gender fluid and she was still there with me, I said, okay, all right, I'm ready to go forward and propose to you and see if, and then it's sort of a weird thing because it's like, I want to make sure that she's the one for me, but I also want to make sure that she has an ability to break away if she doesn't want to be with me long term. And that's exactly where things go in probably the most up and down engagement of anyone, really. It was, so we got engaged and we're elated and we're through the moon happy. But I'm still male presenting very much, and we know where things are going. But outwardly, people don't really know. And so we're in this weird position of like, we want to tell people we're engaged and we're happy, but we're also kind of scared because what if things don't work out? And I mean, every other day I'd be checking in on her. Like when we weren't just talking about something going on in our lives, I'd be like, okay, so how are you feeling? What do you think so far? I know you saw like I was, I let you see like I was shaved the other day. How are you feeling? I was just trying to be really sensitive to what she was going through as much as I could, and explaining the incremental decision-making pathway that I had sort of seen for myself, which was number one, to start bringing more feminine clothes into my regular day in, day out, which I did for a good year, and immediately became sort of read as gay right away by society, and kind of got to see that transformation happen long before I ever started medical treatment like HRT. And then also wear makeup. Those were the two really big things that I wanted to do, and start growing my hair out and get my ears pierced, which she went with me to do that. And we had a lot of fun. But needless to say, it was very much a day in, day out. Is our relationship going to make it? And just being, again, really engaged and sensitive until finally we came to a conclusion that I think just the burden of uncertainty is wearing on us so much. We should just put a little cap to that topic of discussion and just see how things happen like in real time. So like if she's not feeling good, she can just tell me. I don't need to probe it out of her. I don't need to invite it. Although I feel responsible for that. But that's what we do. And we kind of continue forward until finally, this was in February that I proposed, started seeing therapists in May. And I think by the fall, October, November timeframe, we had reached the decision that I wanted to start HRT because I was still having disruptive thoughts. It was still a problem. It was a lot more manageable, but it was telling me like, I think this is the route I want to go because I'm still masculinizing, even though I've done treatments to eliminate body hair and such. It comes back like a fury, because the testosterone just makes that happen. And I'm still having all these, male typical experiences through my body. And so HRT was obviously the right way to eliminate or reduce that effect. And that's where that became the focal point. But before that, I want to just back up to April of 2018, which is when I tell my parents, because that is a huge emotional pivoting point. Because all up to this time, again, I am a person who wants to please their parents. But at the same time, I don't want to be disingenuous to what I'm experiencing and who I am. So in March, I remember talking to my dad and telling him that I had something really big I needed to reveal to him. And he was like, no, no matter. You can just tell us, I'll be there for you. And I was like, I know, but I don't know um, with this particular thing. Um, and and so I just I resolve I'm going to tell them. And so next week I come up in person. It's Easter of 2018, and that night we're sitting in the living room, and I say, Mom, Dad, there's something I got to tell you. And so they come in, they circle, they sit down, and I I just said it like it was. I said, Mom, Dad, I think I might be transgender. And the look on their faces was absolute shock, just surprise. They had no idea that this was going to happen. Um, and I had prepared like crazy for this. I had made a 50 slide PowerPoint. I had written so many Word docs on how I would say this. I had practiced with my roommates, who I had came out to about 2 months prior. I had practiced with my fiance ad nauseum. I had just gone over this so much, but in the moment, it didn't even matter how much I had practiced. I emotions went through the roof, um, just through the roof. And there wasn't really yelling or shouting, but it was like loud speaking, very forceful, very emotionally driven. Um, and I'm trying to backpedal and say, there's transgender Christians. Like this is a thing I've learned. Like there's God has a lot of grace. It's not something you need to just. It doesn't mean anything like definitive. Don't fall into that. And that didn't. It was just on deaf ears. They're just rattling off like how are you this, like you can't possibly be trans, like this is so you were confused, you're misled, Satan's totally gotten dominion on you now. And my dad finally concludes that he says something to the effect of, thank God that God has grace for sinners like you, or something like that. And I was just like, okay, yeah, great. Yes, for all of us, right? I mean, now like that's how I think about it. But thank God for this. But I definitely took that offensively, but it didn't matter ultimately. I was a wash of peace came over my heart that I had finally done what felt like the impossible thing for me, to tell them how I felt. And that I had enough confidence to even say that I thought I was transgender was like mind blowing to me. Just to say that to them. And afterwards, we sort of, it wrapped up, the conversation was over. And I went downstairs to the room in the basement that I was staying in, at my parents' house. And I slept the best I had ever slept that night. And still, that is the best night of sleep I've ever gotten. It's never been better than that one. Yeah, so that really was an apex of not just telling them, but also accepting myself through that process, and saying, if this is a door that I want to go down, then it's there. It's for me. I mean, there's a reason why God had me born at this time of life, going through this, and there's a greater story than I can ever appreciate here. And I just need to just need to figure this out, just walk piece by piece, footstep by footstep, not jumping in any conclusions, not planning out a grand transition and all these things I'm going to do. Take it day by day. And that's very much how I progressed from that point. After that, I just sort of integrated it more and more into my life, again, through cross-dressing, makeup, just being perceived as gay, seeing what that meant, experiencing that through it, and realizing that my target endpoint was truly to transition to female. I'm not someone that's not satisfying everything to just live as, I guess, a gay perceived male, even though I am extremely bisexual. I think I very much view myself in the bi space, not in the gay space. And so that was sort of a experience for me. But I just remember, just to kind of give a window into how repressed I was psychologically, going to work and my arms were shaved. It's like extremely benign thing, not something that's a big deal at all. And the other guy that I was working with, I was talking to him and I just blurted out. I was like, oh, okay, Eli, you might notice that my arms are shaved. I'm just going through some things. You just have to give me some space. And he was just like, dude, I don't care. It's fine. And it just hit me. Like, I am so in my own head. And there's so much like, it's not trauma that's the right word, but there's so much like bottled up expectation and thinking around who men are supposed to be and who women are supposed to be, that it was distorting my reality so much. And so this integration process I went through was really healthy in helping me break out that noise and realize you can be so non-conforming. It doesn't matter. In fact, it's better if you just express yourself freely in non-conforming ways. At least I sort of now really believe that. But for some, that's not going to be the whole story. And they're going to go beyond that. And they're going to seek transition for specific gender anatomical related distress, because that's what that treatment does. It transforms that physicality. And so it wasn't a relationship with my femininity that was the problem. It was truly that I had an underlying medical condition that I would come to term as gender dysphoria that took me to the point of transition on HRT, and then a little bit further for 2 surgeries. And now I would say I'm done, and I have no desire to pursue more surgeries. I don't think life is found or happiness is found in surgeries. It's very important to emphasize that, because so many in our community, in the trans community, can fall into that space. And that's a dangerous one, because it's just easy to continue down that road. So, and so anyways, incrementally approaching it. I make an announcement on Facebook in the fall before I start HRT that I'm transgender. I have gender dysphoria. It's a very point blank. I try to be as like scientific about it as I can, because I want to give myself space. I don't say like I'm a transgender woman. I just say I'm trans, and I'm very careful about my wording. I don't want to box myself. But at the end of the day, I do end up going into the identity of transgender woman. And I'm very comfortable with that now. And totally see that as right for me. But it was such an incremental process of making sense of my experience, making sense of my identity. And finally, by the time I started HRT, I started in January, MLK Day, January 2019. So it's been about like almost 5 years ago or so. But I started. I'm 26. Actually, just turned 26, and I start HRT. And I go through it, and it is like the color in my life is starting to come back, and it's like, oh my gosh, I am not dealing with the same degree of these disruptive thoughts anymore. And part of that is connected to the sexuality. It's like estrogen eliminates your sex drive. Largely, it reduces it like crazy, especially over time. And not so, I mean, a little bit of it's right away, but it's really a progressive thing, I think, too. But I just remember feeling like less inundated with disruption and thoughts of what's life like as the opposite sex. I'm starting to resemble that more. My skin's getting softer. The oiliness on my skin is actually decreasing. Just a lot of like interesting things. I'm smelling a little different. My face is starting to get rounder, and that was like one of my favorite things. And then the hair was growing less rigorously. It was just growing back lighter. And that was super encouraging to me. I was like, all these sources of distress that are very much male specific sources. It's not body dysmorphia. It's not general hatred of myself. It's targeted at the male aspects. That is a critical piece here. And it is true that it was, I don't like to use the word hate, but it was very much like I hated those male aspects a lot. And it was because of this, again, issue of gender dysphoria in my brain that has persisted for a long time. And so I moved forward on HRT, and about 2 to 3 months in, my partner and I decide we're staying together. Not definitively, but again, it's that whole thing of we're not going to bring this up unless there's a problem, and we're just going to continue forward. And there were a couple moments where she was expressing, oh, I kind of do miss like your facial hair a little bit. She had viewed herself very much as heterosexual. But when it came to me transitioning, she was somehow able to make space and change. I don't want to say change her attraction. I don't like using that word, but she was able to be flexible, and she cared more about connecting with me as a person. That those physicality, those aspects didn't really, they were initially a little bit of a hurdle to overcome, but we overcame them, and she was happy to. And that's where it was like, I didn't feel like I was forcing her to, because that would have really upset me. But she was able to just kind of accommodate and work through it with me, and she wanted to. And we did together. And that's where we came to this place of, okay, we want to really set a date for the wedding now. Cause that was when we could be like, okay, it's time to actually act on this engagement, which we had been engaged for like a year up to this point. But we could finally like set a wedding date and start to really, boldly move forward on that. And at this point, everyone around us knew. There was no hiding and no dual life or anything like that. It was like, Skylar is transitioning. And this is something, we're together on, we're unified on this front. And we're moving forward in it. And so that's what happens. And so that is actually during COVID. So COVID has hit because remember, this is 2019 and now into 2020. So right around when COVID hits is when we make this decision together. And we move forward, and we had put a wedding date down, but because COVID came, that got all thrown out of line. It was for 2021, but we weren't going to be able to do that. Actually, I'm sorry, backtracking. Oh, I get the year mixed up a little bit because COVID's such a black hole for me in terms of time. But we had a date pinned down during COVID, but the restrictions on attendance were in effect. So the venue weren't comfortable with having it. So they wanted us to reschedule. And so we did. We booked it out another year and ahead. But that gave me time to also transition a little bit further and also get facial feminization surgery that I did later on. It was the most meaningful surgery out of everything. And it was the one that I most longed for the longest time. Again, I didn't jump into that decision. I waited until I realized like, okay, this is like that final frontier, almost, because I would also get a breast augmentation. But that was sort of at the point where I was like, there are some very specific male aspects that masculinization did to my body that I would like to specifically target. A lot of trans people get a lot of facial feminization surgery, whereas I only picked 3 procedures out of the bucket of handful or whatever that you can do. Nothing on my jaw. I only did the brow ridge, the hairline, and the trachea. So those are the 3 things I got. And again, seeing myself in the mirror after those surgeries was the most fulfilling thing I had ever experienced when it came to seeing myself feel like I was really reflecting what I saw in my mind. And I was so happy I didn't like pursue a radical, like almost like beautification style of it. Some people, those are their goals. And again, I don't want to disparage that and say that's not okay, but I was very cautious in my approach, and I wanted to just look as close to the female version of myself as I could. And that was my goal. And that's what the surgeon really liked that with me. And we vibed really well, and the recovery was great. And by the time we had our wedding, that was where I was at. And I was very feminine presenting, very comfortable with that. And all through this time, I had made a point of not cutting anyone out of my life. My mom was sending me Bible verses all the time, and a lot of them were centered around your identity in Christ. I think it was, again, from a good place, but I think the way that we see that is it's just going to be a little different. She didn't like that at first, but I think she kind of has kind of come around on that a little bit more. I remember when I was first telling her, like, I'm going to start estrogen, and she was like, no, you can't. And she just straight up was like, no. And I don't know if I responded great, but I was like, what other solution would you have me do? And this was sort of a theme in my dialogues with them. But they would send me, there's this organization called Harvest USA, and I talked to the people there. There's a woman named Denise Stick. I think, but she runs like a platform for, again, trying to help people not go down the transition path. And I spoke to her. I spoke to anyone that was thrown my way, anyone critical, in fact, because I was very excited to hear what are other options. Like, tell me, because I'm all for it. I'm listening ears. And it always kind of came back to this idea that you just need to like make peace with yourself but without really any good means. I mean, it was just like, you just need to figure that out. And it's like, well, what if you can't? What if you recognize that there's something endogenous in your brain that is causing um this issue? And that was very much the theme of what my experience sort of had. And it left me sort of in that space of, well, I don't know another way to work with these problems I have. And that's where, again, estrogen transition as a pathway made sense to me, because I had done every single thing I could in the pathway of resistance to double check that this was true for me. And I learned so much through the stories of detransitioners and trans widows, especially, to understand the things to look out for, the potential narcissistic tendencies sometimes revealed in the partners of trans widows, and the regrets of detransitioners that went too far down the medical pathway for them and came to realize that that wasn't what they needed. And so balancing all of that information really informed how I made my decisions incrementally in my transition pathway. But needless to say, during this time, keeping that open communication was critical to helping keep the relationship with my parents and foster that as best as I could, because I knew they loved me, and I knew they wanted what was best for me. They just didn't maybe know what that was. And I was thankfully able, and I think this was part of God being involved in my life, because I was going to a church during this time in the area. And even though I wasn't talking about my gender dysphoria struggles or any of that, I was very much listening intently and looking for whatever God would tell me during this time. And one of those messages was, don't listen to the cultural message of cut out the toxic people. It makes sense. It makes sense for some. I'm not trying to say that everyone needs to keep toxic, emotional people in their life, but you really ought to be careful, because I think Satan wants to use that. He wants to capitalize on that and bring you into a space of loneliness and isolation, when it's really, especially with family, you got to be careful with that and do your best to extend grace and keep that open communication with them. Again, as much as you possibly can. If there's emotional abuse, that's another story. But my parents were not doing that to me. And I was very sensitive to not let that message of cut out the toxic people be distorted to be used as a weapon to say, okay, I'm going to do what so many of my generation do, which is cut out those toxic parents. It's like, no, that's not the solution. That's not what I think is right. And I think that was synonymous with messages I was receiving from God during this time. And so I kept that communication open, and they initially were not going to come to our wedding. So we had announced our wedding, and my parents were like, Skylar, we can't come to this. We can't support you because you're trans. Your identity, your choices is what they said. You made choices that we can't agree with, etc. But something changed. And this is, I'm not totally clear on what changed. But I think over the course of just being in open communication with them and talking with them through the decision-making process, that they changed their minds. They decided they would come to the wedding. And they did come, and they even were involved in some of the ceremonies for it, which was a huge blessing. My partner is Asian. She's Chinese. And so she's Cantonese specifically. And we did a tea ceremony at the beginning, which they were a part of. And that was a huge blessing. I'm so glad that they were willing to be a part of that. And I love them so much for it. I do want to just stress that initially when I did tell them, my dad and mom came up and visited me, and I showed them the 50-page slide PowerPoint. And also, my dad came up the week after that too, and told me explicitly that I was not to return home with any signs of femininity, no nail polish, no feminine clothes, etc. Of course, which I responded, well, what's feminine? How do I know if something's too far or not? But I resolved that that wasn't going to stop me. I would show up at the door and take the rejection at my face if that was true. They never did. Um, and I think that was still the right decision, but they could have, and I would have respected it and I would have left. But it needed to be in the moment. And I knew that there was something deeper that they wouldn't feel was right about that. And I really hoped that would be the case, but not to give up on them was a big thing that I just remember coming back to on this. Um, and so they did come to the wedding. And then fast forward further, my partner and I had been saving for a house, and we were living in DC. And this was again during COVID. Rates were really low on interest rates, so you could easily get a house, but everyone was buying homes around us, so we couldn't just get a house around DC. And I asked my partner, what do you think about moving to Richmond, which is where my parents live? And she had to think about it a little bit because her family is around the DC area. But we came to the conclusion that this is probably the right decision. And we prayed about it as well, or at least I did. She's not a believer, so looks a little different for her. But we were both very sensitive to that, and so I announced. So it come Christmas, we told my family that we were moving to Richmond, and my parents couldn't believe it because that meant we'd be close to them, and that was really important to me because I really value my family, and that's increased ever since I've come out. And even though they don't necessarily accept me, and they definitely have issues with the pronouns and things like that, they are miles beyond where they started. And I see that as God really being at work in our relationship. And today it's like we're just so connected. I was literally at their house last night, and it's such a blessing to have that opportunity to spend time with them, because time is so short, time is so precious. And I've really come to see that and believe that in these later years. Another thing I did is I stored my sperm before I ever made the decision to do HRT. That was part of the decision-making process. That was something good with my therapist, that she pressed that for me. And I agreed. I really wanted to have kids. I asked her how many vials I would need to have 3 kids. That was sort of the target. And she said, I don't know. You'll have to go to the urologist. So I go to a urologist, and she says, I think you need 15. So I made sure to store 29 just to make sure, doubly sure that this would be a possibility. And thankfully was able to have the means to do that. And so now we are in that state of trying to have a family. And this brings me towards the end of my story now, where in that process, so all this time, I even though I had moments and waves of kind of coming back to faith and pressing into that, at the end of the day, it would kind of be part of the adversity would bring that back to the forefront. And then as soon as that's kind of gone and things are getting better, I would just kind of push the faith to the side and just sort of live how I wanted to live freely. Just, I don't want to say necessarily for myself, but in a viewpoint that didn't bring God in a personal way into my life. Until recently, that has changed. And that is part of our fertility journey. So we don't have any children. We've been trying for a little while now. It's been about 2 years. And this past spring, my partner, she was pregnant for a little bit. And it didn't work. She had a miscarriage, and somehow, though, in that experience, I'm sorry. I sometimes get a little emotional still talking about this, but basically, I think God used that to really bring me forward in living intentionally for God. And in my faith, really just living intentionally is really the critical phrase. Because idea that time is precious, time is valuable. And I think I have experiences that can help people make sense of their struggles. And I believe in bringing that forward, and being more visible. And as hard as it is for someone like me, because I hate seeing myself, watching myself in videos, um, it's more important that I follow what I believe is right and what God is telling me to do than to let fear hold me back. And that's been a big, big theme in my recent these past 6 months, since the spring. And as part of that, I am just kind of feeling out different experiences, trying to do what God is telling me to do. Part of that is my most recent freedom group experience. um, and seeing where that goes. That is, I will just say, that is kind of coming to an end, a little bit sooner than I thought. But there's other things that I'm excited for, especially the conference that's coming up. That's something that is huge. And then kind of continuing into God opens doors. I believe that. And my dad wants to like do a book with his children, and read through that together. And I'm all for that. I think that'll be a wonderful experience. So I'm excited for that. And there's other doors too that I'm not going to speak about just yet, but are promising. And so it's, even though we had a miscarriage and there is no baby yet, or right now, we God still used that to stir something in me that I'm grateful for, because I feel like I'm actually living in the potential of what I'm supposed to be doing by bringing him into my day and day, and just being visible and sharing my life, and knowing that there's gonna be a lot of people that don't like what I have to say. I think in the trans community and gender critical spaces, I mean, there's no winning with when you're such a polarizing, when you have such a polarizing identity somewhat. But I'm a real big believer in building bridges, sharing in mutuality across different perspectives, and recognizing that you can't just take away from something, you got to replace it with something better. That's something I really believe in, and I want to continue that theme with. Um, I think that might be a good stopping point for my story.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And now you didn't really explain Freedom Group on here, but I just want to say a little bit about it because that's one of the things that you've been doing on your channel. And so basically, Skylar's been attending this group that's a religious group, and it's uh, like a 12-week course or something. And so she's kind of documenting her experiences. And so it's really interesting if you go and watch her channel. And now you've given us a little teaser. You said the experience is ending sooner than you thought. And I'm not gonna probe about that because I'm sure you have something coming out that you're gonna talk about on your channel. But please do go and subscribe to Skylar. And I have been very blessed by what I've watched every single thing on her channel. And it's your story with your partner, which is actually totally, I think it's set to music. It's not talking, but it really documents your story with your partner, and it's very touching. So that, and then all your experiences with Freedom Group, that it has been wonderful because what I love is the charity, the grace that you're showing for the people who disagree with you. And I commented on one of your videos because this freedom group is supposed to be helping people become free in the Lord and really receive the love of God and live in joy and peace and happiness. But what's interesting is it seems like actually the people in the freedom group could benefit more from Skylar's freedom. And so I was hoping that really they would learn from you about, it really having freedom in your relationship with God and knowing and receiving the love of God for you. And so anyway, there's a lot of wisdom in Skylar's approach and the depth in which she explores topics, and I really love your channel. So please do go subscribe to her. And thank you so much for sharing your journey. I'm sure that this is going to benefit people. And for Christians who may be watching who kind of have the perspective that Skylar's parents do, where you're kind of thinking of this as a bad lifestyle choice or something sinful. I really hope that you'll reconsider that. I mean, after hearing her story, do you really sense a basis of sin in this story? I don't sense that. And so, I feel like we really need to understand people's experiences, and you sharing your experience today. I think for those who have ears to hear and are willing to really pay attention, they can hear that your desire is good. It's your desire is to follow Christ and to love God and to live in this world as a person who's loving and serving others. And this isn't coming from a place of just a, a sinful desire of the flesh, but it's something, like you said, that's innate within you. And as Christians, we should understand that there is much more to a person than just the physical expression of their body. Not that the body is not important, but that there is something, our spiritual selves are, integral. We have to understand that, like, for some people like Skylar, they who they really see themselves to be is better expressed if they can physically transition. So thank you for being willing to come on and share so candidly about everything you went through.
Absolutely. Yes, Rebecca, I love your kind words at the end here. It's absolutely it brings so much joy to me to see people like yourself receive my story so positively. I hope that's what comes through. I'm blessed that I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to make mistakes along the way, and for sure I made quite a number. But my hope is that by sharing my story, others won't make the same mistakes, for at least trans or gender questioning people in that space. And then also it just opens up a little bit more of a window into the humanity behind really the conventional story of gender dysphoria, and how that is something endogenous. It doesn't go away. It needs to be managed. It needs to be worked with, and that it's a tricky story. No one is exactly the same, but that it's definitely, I think, in the role of Christians, it's the right response is the grace-filled response of trying to understand and meet that person where they're at.
And also, for those who are coming from Christian conservative environments, the Bible does not address being transgender. So you're not getting this from the Bible if you're against it. So just try to consider that this is not coming from the Bible. This is coming from an environment that, has shaped what you've thought about this issue. And so, I just hope people will consider that. And thank you all for watching. Thank you for being part of just in listening to Skylar's journey. And did you want to say any final words, Skylar?
Um, just also a thank you to everyone who's watched. This is my second time sharing my story ever. I will be doing more on my channel to kind of get this in pieces and explore it in packaged topics. But until then, this is it.
Cool. And I will say one last word. If you're a transgender Christian or any Christian LGBTQ, if you are looking seriously, there's a lot of conservative Christian environments that, would not be affirming. But you know what? There's also a ton of Christian churches of all kinds of denominations that are totally affirming of LGBTQ people, that will just love you exactly as you are and say to you, Jesus loves you as you are. And so that if you want, just go look, and you can even look on Wikipedia. They have a list of totally affirming denominations, and you can find churches in your local area. So please don't think that if you hear Christians who are against, gay people or trans people, please don't think that that's all of Christianity, because there is lots of us that totally love you and receive you as you are and know that it is not a sin to be gay. It's not a sin to be trans. And that's the conference that Skylar mentioned that we're going to be going to. So I'm actually going to get to meet Skylar in person in a week and a half, and we welcome all of you to join us. It's the Centerpiece Conference. It's going to be in Dallas, Texas. And if anybody is wanting to go, but you look at the price and you're like, oh no, I cannot pay for that, call me. I mean, don't call me. I don't give out my phone number. Send me an email. My email is breadoflifechannel@gmail, and I will buy you a ticket. I can do that for one more person. So please do get in contact with me, because I'd love to meet you there too. So yeah. Thank you so much, Skylar, and God bless you, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.